Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Welcome to today's program, and one of our favorite topics is interviewing authors of books, and you, our viewers, often respond in a very positive way, introducing another book that you might consider reading. I welcome to the program today an author who's been a friend for a very long time, and it's so great to see him back in our community today, Dr. Rodney Fry. Our guest holds a baccalaureate and also a master's degree from Colorado State University, and his doctorate is from the University of Colorado. And he is also a professor of anthropology at the University of Idaho. He's written a book recently that we're really excited about interviewing, and he's here today in our community, invited by the Human Rights Education Institute, which is starting their series called Democracy Enterprises. And Sandy Emerson on that committee is really responsible for this program, and we thank he and the Human Rights Education Institute. The title of the book that we're going to address today is Landscape Travel by Coyote and Crane, and it's about the Coeur d'Alene Indian tribe. It's just a wonderful work that Dr. Fry has done. Rodney, welcome to the program. It's good to see you again.
It's great being here and good seeing both of you.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our regular panelist, Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and she'll commence today's questioning.
Thanks, Tony. Welcome to the show, Rodney. Before we get into the specifics of the book and have you later in the program share with us one of the brief oral traditions of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, I want for you to please share with our viewers a little of the history and the background of the Coeur d'Alene peoples, if you would.
Well, it's a exciting history, a wonderful history, a powerful history, and kind of like an elevator going up and down. There's some oscillations in it that aren't so pretty, but that history of contact with Europeans and Americans has had some negative effects on the tribe, but throughout it all there's been this resurgence, this vitality, and they have a great, great story to tell. It's a very complicated history, as with so many tribes in the Pacific Northwest. But their history, in a sense, really begins with the first peoples, the animal peoples, even before contact. History was always there. They've had a proud tradition, and I've been so enthralled with the idea that it's those teachings that have been imparted through the oral traditions, embedded in the land, as they interacted with the landscape of Coyote and Crane, that they've listened to those teachings, and those teachings have been brought forth into their lives, in their decisions as a people, at tribal council, in their health care, in their economic development, in their gaming operations. All those traditions, those ancient traditions, that ancient history is still very much alive today in their history, despite the effects of smallpox, despite the effects of war, of some negative history with the missionaries, despite that history of allotment and reservation. Nevertheless, they're still a strong and proud people today.
And were they a group that migrated through different areas, or where did they actually locate?
Well, their homeland is right here at their heart, their soul, Lake Coeur d'Alene. This is where the Creator brought them forth in this landscape. They've always been here since time immemorial. They certainly had a pattern of travel, of transhumance, very purposeful, very specific, very knowledgeable. As the seasons changed, as the seasons differed from year to year, their tremendous knowledge allowed them to gather the roots in the spring and summer. They know where the huckleberries were in the fall. They knew where the deer was in the winter. They knew where the fish was. They knew where all this was, and they would migrate and move with that within a region from Lake Coeur d'Alene, Pend Oreille Lake to the north, the Bitterroots to the east, all the way out to the Rathdrum Prairie, and south to the Clearwater drainage. That entire over 5 million acres is a traditional homeland of the Coeur d'Alene people, and they moved and knew that landscape so well that had a great life.
Your book has been out for about 5 years. It's titled The Landscape Travel by Coyote and Crane. Share with us how the book came about.
Well, I was working in various capacities with the tribe, actually with Lewis Clark State College in Coeur d'Alene at the time, and I was approached by their Director of Natural Resources, Alfred Nomi, to assist in their natural resource damage assessment. They were very concerned about the effects of mining and pollution, particularly on the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River and as it affected Lake Coeur d'Alene. And they wanted to have a baseline study of what they, as a people, how they interacted with their environment prior to contact, prior to the heavy pollution, and how that has been affected and how that continues today, how they as a people relate to the camas and the deer and the water and the lake. And so they wanted to really kind of an overview of their relationship with the landscape, both in the past and the present, to understand the effects of the mining and the pollution on the lake. So they asked me to conduct this study. I worked with elders at their discretion. It's very much a partnership. It's very much a collaboration. I'm not the author of this book. We're, the Coeur d'Alene tribe and myself, co-authored this book. Royalties for the sale of the book go back to their language program, for example. You know, it's their history and their book. And so we put together this study interviewing. It was very important that we presented this story, though, within a framework that is very Coeur d'Alene. It could have been a framework that's based upon anthropology. We start with economics and social structure and religion and mythology. But from their cosmology, they start with the first peoples, the animal peoples. They start with their creation story. And that was our place to start as we presented their story with the first peoples and their oral traditions. Again, categorizing how we present the material from their perspective. So we start with the first people that laid out an environment, prepared the world for the coming of human peoples, embedding within it gifts that peoples would need, teachings, lessons, the spirit power to rejuvenate and bring forth life itself. All that was embedded in the landscape before the coming of human peoples as they understand it. They were brought forth. There's a story of their own creation, other Indian creations. And then seeing that environment as an environment full of gifts that they could utilize and to share with others, and understand those as gifts, not as natural resources, but seeing the environment as gifts endowed within it to be used correctly. And how are those gifts then shared with all those around them? And so it touched upon issues of social organization, family, of economics, of religion, but it organized in a way that's much more compatible with how they understand their place in the world. And so we tried to present that story in that light. And then there's a separate chapter then that deals with the contact history that the Coeur d'Alenes have faced, as other tribes have faced in the region as well. So we go over that history. So we wanted a story that they would feel comfortable sharing. And I interviewed over 30 elders representing many, many families in the Coeur d'Alene tradition. And they wanted their stories told because many of those elders now are deceased. And they wanted their future generations to be able to have some of those stories, albeit in a written form, which is not the best way to preserve those oral traditions. It's the word of mouth that's so critical. But we try to format the stories, for example, with an oral nuance, almost in a poetic style, to retain some of that voice of the elders. And then the entire manuscript went through a very thorough review over 6 months. It went through every elder that was involved with it, every elders group, cultural committee. They even had me go up to Welpanet with the Spokanes and have them review the material before we present it to tribal council, in which they voted on to make sure that what we put together was appropriate to share publicly, authentic, representing their voice, to be able to be shared in this format. So it went through, we really wanted to make it, really anchored with the tribe itself.
Well, that's just amazing. There's very few books and authors that are so sensitive that they will absolutely not finish a book without what you just described, and so I know they're very pleased. Among the other things that you did, because we've had the privilege on this program over the years of interviewing a number of members of the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and what great storytellers, and the oral history that's so essential. And fortunately, in a very, very brief way, we were able to capture on this program some of the stories and put those in our library. But your book is filled with wonderful stories, and we're going to pause now to let you tell. I think you picked one before we went on the air that was approximately 5 minutes. I think the reader would really appreciate the fact of hearing what one of those stories is all about.
Well, I'm certainly one who can't do justice to the stories. This story was originally shared in about 1927 by Dorothy Nicodemus, who's the grandmother of Lawrence Nicodemus, who passed away a few years ago at the age of 95 or so. And she had learned this story when she was a child, thus in the old days, and it has been carried forth through into the present. It's a little story of a little mountain not far from here. It's a story of Rabbit and Jackrabbit. Jackrabbit and Rabbit were brothers. They cared for each other very much. It's a harsh winter, cold, the wind, and Rabbit, who lives here near Moses Mountain, which is in the southern part of the reservation, is very concerned about his brother, Jackrabbit, who lives way out in the Big Bend country. Jackrabbit out there is concerned about his brother, Rabbit. Does he have enough food? Does he have enough, dried meat? Does he have enough dried salmon? Is he okay? Does he have enough pitch to start a fire? They're concerned about each other. Rabbit brings with him in a backpack pitch and other things to start a fire. And Jackrabbit out there brings in dried camas and dried things for his brother to eat. And they begin this very dangerous journey through the snow in the winter toward each other's camps, not knowing that the other is coming toward them. Eventually they come to a large mountain. And for the rabbits, it is a large mountain, Tico Mountain, which is just south of here. And they start climbing up, making their way to the summit, where they see each other. Oh, Rabbit, I was worried about you. Do you have enough pitch to start a fire? Jackrabbit's concerned about the other. Do you have enough food, dried camas? And they're very concerned about the other person. I'm fine. I have enough pitch. I have enough dried camas. I'm fine. And so that which was in their packs, dried camas, dried meat, pitch, they throw off onto the landscape, shaking hands and going back to their respected places. And that's the end of the trail. A little story of the first peoples. This is an account that occurred for the Coeur d'Alene before the coming of human peoples. It talks about two of the first peoples, two of the animal peoples, Rabbit and Jackrabbit, and what they did, a little something what they did in that landscape, embedding it with pitch, that those who would be coming soon, the human peoples, would need to start their fires. Camas, that they would dig on the slopes and in the valleys and the prairies around Tico Mountain, that food source, just two little items. They were embedding it in the landscape. And so as you travel past Tico Mountain even today, as you engage the landscape, this story might come to you. You might remember this story. And in the story, maybe there's a mayap, maybe there's a teaching of how brothers should respond to each other and care for each other, sacrificing themselves for the welfare of someone else. Maybe that lesson's in there for you as you engage the environment. Just a little story. Most of the stories are much longer, and I hope I did it justice.
Oh, I think you did. I think the members of the tribe would agree. Those stories are so powerful, and I get out of it, and I'm sure everyone has some different interpretations, but that you, in gift-wise, you receive and you give. And secondly, I just hear such powerful message in these stories about the respect and the love of nature. And that comes up to today when they've been so concerned about the lake and the pollution and all. And now after a U.S. Supreme Court decision, when they were granted and recognized that they truly did own at least 1/3 of the lake, I see that these stories, would you agree these stories are very powerful and helpful for them today in modern times as they manage these issues?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, just in this one little instance of Rabbit and Jackrabbit, there's a powerful message that gets amplified in so many of the oral traditions, and it really is an ethic of sharing, what the elders have called an ethic of sharing. When you think about it from their worldview, the first peoples, the animal peoples, prepared the world for the coming of the human peoples. They gave, they sacrificed to prepare the landscape with all that which human peoples will need to survive. They weren't in it for themselves, they just did this. In turn, the animal peoples that are living in the present, the salmon, the deer, all that which we depend upon, the roots, again, they offer themselves to those in need. A deer will come out of a thicket when a hunter, a designated hunter from a tribe is after it, but if in a respectful, honorable way, not trying to take the deer will offer itself, giving itself unselfishly to its brother. It's all this sense of kinship. In turn, the designated hunters, the cooks, the gatherers, the root diggers, all those individuals in the tribe will be giving unselfishly to all those in need, a grandmother, a sick person, a family that maybe lost their husband. You know, all those in need are taken care of by those who can provide. In turn, even those who are deceased, when they pass on across the water, they're going ahead to prepare the camp for the coming of the rest of the family, going ahead to find the best berry patches and pasture for the horses. Again, this idea of sharing. And so it's throughout their tradition, throughout their oral traditions. And again, when it comes to decisions made at, for example, their health facility today, or how they're to distribute gaming revenues, how they're to open up their tribal school. For example, the tribal school is open to everyone Indian, non-Indian, in the community who wants an education. There'd been a health facility, a state-of-the-art health facility, open to everyone, not just Indians, but anyone in need has access to that facility. It's incredible. And so you see that sort of, that spirit of the teachings manifest in the things the tribe do today.
They just keep carrying it on. It's bedded in everything that they believe.
I believe so.
Yeah. Erna Reinhardt.
Rodney, your book does a wonderful job of not only chronicling the stories of the Indian people and making that history known to all of us, but what are some of the other things that the tribe is doing to keep those stories alive? I mean, this is obviously a huge effort to put this into a book that can be shared with everybody. But is the tribe itself, are those stories being kept alive, or do they continue to tell those stories?
Well, it's certainly occurring on many different levels. I think the most important level is within each individual family. It's those family traditions. And each family may understand their own history a little differently. Certainly part of the Coeur d'Alene family itself, the larger family, but they may be more oriented toward powwow and the regalia and the song of a powwow and the drum, the song that comes from that. Maybe they're a little bit more oriented toward the hunting and the gathering endeavors. There's lots of ways these oral traditions get expressed, and some of them would be in the stories, but oral traditions is inclusive of the song, of the dance, of the rituals, not just the stories told. And so families will select, because of their individual histories and because of maybe influences from other sources, boarding school missionaries that have blocked some of the access and the remembering of some of these things. So it's a real individualized thing on a family level, but perhaps the most important. And certainly the tribe as a collective is also working toward that, rejuvenating their language, a very active language program, working with the elders. There's only so few that have retained and are fluent in the language, but trying to bring that forth in the schools, teaching it at all levels, encouraging it, renaming the landscape, for example, taking away so many anglicized words, that words as a name to a landscape is a very powerful imposition. And it talks about reasserting the sovereignty of the tribe when you can go back and rename that landscape in your own terms. So they're making endeavors like that. And so they're also a very aggressive cultural resource management program. And storing archiving this and making it accessible for the population, all this material. So they're doing conscious efforts. But I think it's perhaps best exemplified simply in the sovereign decisions of the tribe when it comes to gaming and economic development and health care for their future generations and education, that you really see the spirit of Coeur d'Alene. They're sort of on the surface, they look 9-to-5 jobs, they dress like you and I, but there's a spirit that's uniquely Coeur d'Alene, as so many tribes had their unique spirits, that's being represented today. So it's exciting.
It is. In discussions on both this program and some wonderful, wonderful days with members of the tribe at different functions, I've had some wonderful dialogues with members of the tribe with this incredible, wonderful history and traditions that go back. We don't know, it just goes back and back. And then they talk about the vision of the priest coming, in the black robes. And I certainly can't speak to the issue as they would, but they talked about how they worked with this too, their tradition and then the Catholic priest coming. What can you say about how they've been able to adjust those together?
Well, there's been lots of celebration in that relationship and lots of sorrow. I mean, it's they certainly welcomed the black robes, the Jesuits, when De Smet showed up in 1842 on the Rathdrum Prairie, welcomed it in, and they were going to help him understand the other way to the heaven gates, that there's multiple ways there. And they brought him in and they worked with the Jesuits. And the Jesuits, I think many of the early priests had good intentions and they helped the tribe. They were the ones who stood up against Colonel Wright when he had this sort of slash and burn effect in 1858 after the Battle of Steptoe, for example, which devastated the battles that followed that era in the fall of that year, for example. The Jesuits tried to protect the tribe. They tried to bring education. They tried to bring farming to the tribe. They tried to protect them in so many ways. But the Jesuits also brought, particularly about 1900 to 1920, a very harsh and repressive period of time that wasn't characteristic of the earlier times and certainly not characteristic today, where individuals were persecuted for traditional beliefs and practices. It was a very, very harsh period of time when regalia and traditional medicine objects would be burned publicly. And so there's a harsh period there that has left a scar on a lot of folks, and particularly in the boarding school that was run for a period of time. There's, again, a lot of repression and headaches, a lot of scars. So it's very much a mixed bag, but I think today, a lot of celebration, a lot of joy for many families, a birth of a child, a marriage of two families, the sorrow that comes with the passing. They would never, ever give up the important orchestration that the Catholic Church brings to those periods of celebration and sorrow, for example. Those are important parts of life today and the ebb and flow of life today. So it's very much a mixed bag. There's still some pain, but there's still a lot of glory and rejoicing in what the Jesuits brought. So
I want to move in one other area before I go back to Erna. Another thing that I just have such a remarkable admiration and respect for the Coeur d'Alene tribe. It's the tribe that I know best.
Yeah.
I have some knowledge of the Cherokee tribe from my growing up in North Carolina. But something that impresses me so much is there are two things, is with all the rest of society, how incredibly patient the tribe has been on. At times it's been really difficult for them. And there, in addition to the patience, is tremendous politeness and respect. I've seen them in situations where something was rather harsh toward them, but they did not lose their dignity. If you speak to that, it's a remarkable trait within the tribe.
Well, maybe it's in partly a trait that they've learned through experience. I mean, the contact history has been extensive. There were 3 Coeur d'Alene who were actually at the confluence of the Potlatch and the Clearwater when Lewis and Clark were coming back in 1806. And they had their first, that is, Lewis and Clark descriptions of Coeur d'Alene country. And of course the Coeur d'Alenes, they understood this and they elected not to get involved at that time. It would be during the fur trade that they became more involved. And they had some harsh dealings. Some lessons were learned, I suspect. And I think that's given them patience because there has been administrations, there's been policies, and they've had to roll with that. They've fought their best, but it's been their sort of inner spirit that they had to persevere through that. And again, also, I think it might be part of that spirit of sharing, of opening up their hearts to people who they consider potentially as brothers, as family members. And they will encourage that sort of sharing and respect toward one another. But don't get me wrong here, when they understand an adversary, the Coeur d'Alenes, they know how to interact with an adversary with the best of Coyote's skills and being a trickster and all the prowess that they would need to deal with an adversary. So I don't want to characterize them as a passive group by any means. They have a tremendous spirit.
They're not to be described as weak. It's just they have great strength, but it's how they go about it. They with such gracefulness and I would use the word dignity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes. Erna Reinhardt.
I'm sure that there were a lot of special moments for you when you put the book together, but I'm hoping that you can take one special moment that may have happened during one of the interviews that you could share with us, maybe an aha moment or just a special time when someone really opened up their heart to you, or if you can share with us what those interviews were like and maybe one special memory of one of those interviews, if you could.
Well, there were so many. It's really hard to isolate one, but I do remember the wonderful experience I had with one of the grandmothers. And she was so full of dignity and openness and invited me into her home, and we shared stories and shared, food, traditional foods that she so enjoyed, and the dress that she would wear and other beaded gowns and regalia that she had. It was just wonderful. But our relationship grew very quickly, and maybe she recognized that of the importance of this sort of project, that she shared so many things about her husband and the powers that he had as involved in the spiritual world. So many things that I felt honored because she wanted these shared with her grandkids, and she, for whatever reasons, didn't have that opportunity. But through our voice in this book, did, and very, very powerful in situations that a person can read about of that spiritual integrity of the people themselves and what potentially can happen. Many situations like that. I was honored to be, to hear that when even some of her grandkids did not. But again, it wasn't me that she was directing that to. It would be the future generation and her grandkids and great-grandkids.
I know that we've reached the point in the program that some of our wonderful viewers say, I've got to have this book. And I hope that is the case. And this is a book published by the University of Washington Press, both in Seattle and London. And our bookstores in the area, I'm sure that they have them or would order them, such as Borders or Hastings or Auntie's, and there are other great bookstores in our area. Is that correct?
It should be, yeah. It should be relatively available anywhere. And if it's not, just have it ordered, you know. And again, it was truly a work of love.
And the website has just come up. If you would also verbalize the website that people can contact you through this, would you do that, please? It's on the screen there.
Yeah. www.webpagesuidaho.edu, that @R-Fry. At that link, by the way, we have streamed a lot of the interview material. And so, for example, Lawrence Arepa was very gracious in helping with the construction of this book. We have many of those stories he shared during the 90s on digital streaming video, so you can actually see, and though he's no longer here, you can hear his voice and see him and share those stories in that format. There's a website that was created with the Coeur d'Alene tribe that has over 6 hours of streaming interview material that folks can access, again, through that website.
Well, that's wonderful, because particularly after reading this book and getting excited, then they can go up, or vice versa. They could, you know, through working with Lawrence and others, you've been able to actually capture some of the audio, the oral history. So I'm really, really glad that we showed the website. Well, Rodney, with this, we have to bring the program to a conclusion. It's so great to see you, and it was such a great program. And Erna, as always, had tremendous questions. They were just so good, and I've immensely enjoyed it, and I know Erna has too, and we thank our staff too for all their work. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to once again remind you that the book's titled Landscape Travel by Coyote and Crane from the University of Washington Press, about the world of the Coeur d'Alene Indian tribe. And I hope that you will consider reading this book, because we do quite often interview people on books, and we love to do that. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, when, as always, we will turn yet to another issue, and hope you'll be with us. And write to us or call us from time to time at North Idaho College and give us your views of what you'd like to have us to do. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.